chatting with my son the other day, and he said, Dad, have you ever done a video on why you almost call me Otis? And I said, well, you know, really, I haven't done one specifically on that. I have mentioned it a few times. If you've heard the story, please bear with me. But James, just for you, buddy, I'm going to tell you in my own words exactly what happened on November 6, 1988. It started out as a pretty uneventful day. It was a Sunday. We slept late that morning and got up, ate breakfast, and got ready to go to church. We were going to the second service. Your mother was singing sang in the choir. And right before we go to church, your mother gets me aside, and you've been percolating in her for a long time, and she says, I'm starting to have contractions. And of course, I said, well, let's get in the car, let's go to the hospital. And she said, no. Christian, our firstborn, took her over 24 hours, I think, for her to come from labor. And she said, I don't want to spend a full day in the hospital doing nothing but just having contractions. Says, I can do that at home. So, being an idiot, I said, okay. So we went to church. And all through the service, your mother's having contractions. And we get home, and she fixes lunch, still having contractions. And I notice that she seems to be having these contractions a little more often, at least from the expression on her face. And we just sat down to eat lunch, and her water broke. Well, that's not good. Now I am really panicking, and I said, okay, look, we have got to go now. And your mother's still not seems like she's really not concerned. She says, okay, but I have to pack my bag first. Well, she goes into the bedroom and opens up the dresser, and in between contractions where she's leaning heavily on the dresser, she's throwing a few things into a bag, and she finally gets it all together. So I grab your sister, who's 6 at the time, and her bag, and we jump in the minivan, and we're headed to town. Now it's 45 minutes to the hospital. It's over 30 miles. It's 45 minutes from our house to the hospital. And so I am booking it. I'm pushing that minivan as fast as I can safely go. And all the while, your mother is sitting there very quietly, kind of curled up in the seat. Takes her shoes off, just kind of curled up almost with her feet underneath her. And everything is really driving me nuts, but under control until we get about 3 blocks from the hospital. And we're sitting at a stoplight, and your mother makes this noise I've never heard before. And I am freaking out, and I'm trying to decide, do I pull over and try to deliver this baby, or flag down some help, or what, or do we go to the hospital? And your mother was no use at this point to me, so I just said, well, heck, we're going to the hospital. Baby, you're going to be born to the hospital, buddy. So we get to the hospital uneventfully, although your mother is very, very quiet. She's not saying anything now. And she's kind of curled up against the door. And I pull up to the front of the hospital and go inside and say, my wife's having a baby. I need a wheelchair out here. And a nurse comes out and gets her into the wheelchair. And she says, you can't park right here, you've got to park over there. So she points me to a parking spot about 50 feet away, and I zoom over there and grab my daughter out of the back and grab my wife's shoes and her bag, and in I go. And there I find her in the middle of the lobby, nobody around her, just sitting in a wheelchair. And I'm standing there for a few minutes, I don't know what's going on, and then this nurse comes up and says, okay, honey, you ready to go upstairs now? And my wife, at that time, your mother, doesn't say anything. And so we're sitting there, and the nurse notices that your mother's not sitting down flat in the chair. She's kind of on one cheek, kind of leaned over one of the arms of the wheelchair. And she says, honey, you can sit down. Go ahead and sit down flat. And she tries to push her down. Well, she won't be pushed. She holds onto the arm of the chair, won't sit square in the chair. So the doors of the elevator open up, and in we go. And it's a fine elevator. It's you've seen plenty of them. It's an elevator made by the Otis Elevator Company. I'm not sure where they're located, but there are lots of these elevators. You see them all over the place. And the doors close on the elevator, and the nurse says, "Honey, sit down. Go ahead and sit down." And she won't sit. We're headed up to I believe it was the 3rd floor to maternity. And she says, "Well, here, let me look." And she goes around front and lifts up my wife's skirt and looks. And there you are, like a little baby burglar looking out through her pantyhose. And about that time, the door opens up and she screams, "We need a room! We need a room now!" And off she goes down at a dead run, pushing your mother down the hallway. Another nurse at the other end pops out and opens up a door right there, and in they go. Now, I am trying to drag your sister, and I've got my hands full of her bag and her shoes, and I'm a little late getting there. And about the time I get to the door, the nurse stands in front of the door and says, "You can't take that little girl in there," referring to your sister. So I said, "Well, what do I do with her?" And they said, "Well, there's a waiting room at the end of the hall." And I said, "Okay." So we hurry on back down the way we came, and right there, right across from the elevator, is a waiting room. And it's got several people in it. It's got TV, and I set you down in front of the TV with the bag and your mom's shoes, and asked a couple that were sitting there, said, "Would you just mind keeping an eye on her for me just for a second? I've got to run down the hall." They said they'd be glad to. And off I go. And I go and get in the room, and what do I see? You're on a table being cleaned up by the nurses. Your mother's on the bed being cleaned up by another nurse. Doctor never made it there, just the nurses. And I asked the nurse later what happened, and she said, yeah, she was freaking out when she saw you were being born in the elevator. And so when she got your mother onto the bed, they whipped your mother up onto the bed real quick and said, she pulled your mother's pantyhose down, and whoosh, you were born. And that's that story. And the reason why you're called James Walter Smith instead of Walter Otis Smith or just Otis Smith is because your mother wouldn't let me name you after the elevator you were born in. Now, she may disagree with this story. She may say it's an outright lie, but I'm telling you, it's the honest to God truth. I was there at the time. And if need be, I'll find those nurses, because I know they never forgot that day. All right, buddy, I hope that's what you wanted. That's the story of you. Oh, and you're not called Otis because your mom just absolutely refused. But I thought it'd be cool. So I'm always going to think of you as James Walter Smith, the Otis, the baby bandit. So there you go, buddy. You take care, all right? Bye-bye.